Hi there. Today I am going to explain a film called Shame. Brandon is a corporate employee who travels to his work in a local subway. He has a daily routine of having romantic nights with different prostitutes. Each morning he gets up and repeats his schedule and ends up paying different women on different nights. One day, while traveling in the subway, he makes eye contact with a blonde woman. Initially, the lady likes his attention but soon gets fed up with Brandon's continuous staring. Ultimately, she gets up to leave at the stop and reveals her wedding ring to Brandon. Nevertheless, Brandon tries to follow her after the stop, but eventually loses the woman amidst the crowd. Irritated, Brandon returns back to his office and sits inside his cabin. He uses his office computer to watch adult stuff and the office bathroom for self-pleasure. Till now, we get to know that Brandon has an addiction to pleasure and romance. When Brandon gets at his home at night, he gets a curious voicemail from a woman whom he chooses to ignore. Brandon also has a boss named David, who seems to be his good pal. After a successful day at the office, David takes out Brandon and his colleague for an expensive dinner. When they reach the club, David tries to seduce one of the ladies at the bar. After some time, Brandon comes to the bar to assist his boss in the process. David completely fails at attracting the ladies, and all his tricks fall flat. However, one of them looks at Brandon with keen interest. When everyone leaves the club, Brandon meets the same woman, and she even insists on a lift. Soon after, both of them do the deed in a public area. When he arrives at his apartment at night, he notices the sound of music coming from inside. He takes out a baseball bat to defend himself from the stranger. Finally, when he walks inside the bathroom, he finds his sister Sissy taking a shower. During the morning, Sissy reveals that her boyfriend cheated on her, and that she needs a place to crash for a few days. Brandon helps her out and gives Sissy permission to stay. When both of them take the subway to their work, Sissy requests Brandon to come to see her performance. Sissy sings in a bar and has constantly invited Brandon, who never cared to show up. This time, Brandon makes a promise to be present at her performance. The next morning, Brandon arrives at the office and receives a surprise. The IT guys took his computer as a result of a big virus. Brandon feels a little worried but shrugs it off later. David greets Brandon and asks him about the previous night. Brandon hides the real story and tells it differently. He also asks David to come with him to a bar tonight, where her sister is performing after office hours. They both reach the bar and wait for Sissy's performance. Both of them get completely blown away by her singing, while Brandon gets a little emotional. When Sissy wraps her performance, she comes to their seat and starts having a conversation with David. They both start flirting with each other, and end up making out in the taxi, while on their way back home. Upon returning to the apartment, Sissy and David engage in romantic activity and make Brandon even more uncomfortable. He decides to go for a run and leaves both of them alone. When Brandon returns, he notices that David and Sissy have gone to sleep, and that he can finally take some rest himself. In the middle of the night, Sissy comes inside Brandon's room and starts to cuddle with him. Brandon gets infuriated with Sissy and shouts at her to leave the room. Sissy leaves the room immediately. When Brandon returns to his office in the morning, David calls him inside the cabin. He informs Brandon that his hard drive on the computer was full of adult videos and explicit content. He believes that an intern might have gotten hold of his computer, and that he must take notice of it. David gets busy on his computer while having a video call with his kid. Brandon leaves his cabin and gets back to work. When Brandon is busy making his coffee, his colleague Marianne tries to have a small conversation with him. Brandon reciprocates the signals, and they both decide to meet later in the evening for a date. Brandon reaches the restaurant a little late than Marianne and greets her. They both exchange their views on marriage and relationships, while a waiter constantly interrupts their flow. Ultimately, Brandon walks Marianne to her home and ensures a second date. After coming back home, Brandon realizes that Sissy has not arrived yet. He takes the opportunity to pleasure himself in the bathroom, and is suddenly interrupted by Sissy, who comes inside without knocking. She sees Brandon pleasuring himself and immediately leaves with a smile. Brandon gets really angry at Sissy for this and confronts her right after. Sissy feels threatened, while Brandon locks himself inside the bathroom. Sissy discovers Brandon's laptop and watches the adult content playing on it. Brandon immediately shuts off the laptop and goes inside his room. While Sissy realizes that Brandon is addicted to pleasure and leaves the apartment in disgust. Brandon contemplates the moment and throws all the explicit magazines out of his room, including the laptop. The next morning, Brandon affectionately pulls Marianne by her side and starts to get romantic with her. They both leave the office during the day and start having a moment inside the hotel room. But this time, Brandon fails to perform and asks Marianne to leave the place. When Marianne takes off, Brandon calls another lady and completes his fantasy with her. When Brandon comes back to his apartment and watches television, Sissy sits by his side and asks him to give him a side hug. Brandon hugs Sissy and confronts her about David. He informs Sissy that David is married and asks her to never call him again. Sissy tries to apologize, but Brandon stays on with the argument. At last, Sissy confronts Brandon about his addiction to pleasure. Brandon leaves no response and decides to leave the place. He ends up drinking at a bar where he meets another lady. Brandon tries to get romantic with the lady right until her boyfriend appears to stop him. Brandon does not pay heed to him and continues with his flirting. When Brandon leaves the bar, the boyfriend beats him up and leaves him wounded. Brandon gets up and receives a voicemail from Sissy. This time she asks him to pick up her call and says that it's really urgent. Brandon chooses to ignore Sissy and visits another place for getting pleasure, where he gets intimate with 2 women at the same time, while ignoring all the calls of Sissy. When he is finally done for the night, he takes a subway back to his home. When his station arrives, there is an announcement that somebody has committed self-harm and that they all need to exit from a different gate. Brandon leaves the station and thinks that Sissy might have done something similar. He sprints back to his place and gets inside his room. He notices Sissy laying down inside the bathroom with blood all over her hands. Brandon immediately calls 911 and gets Sissy to a hospital. In the very next scene, Brandon is seen beside Sissy on a hospital bed. When Sissy regains consciousness, Brandon takes a sigh of relief. He gets out of the hospital and suffers an emotional breakdown. Rain starts pouring in when Brandon starts to cry. He realizes how he has messed up his life due to his addiction and decides to recover from it. After some weeks, Brandon is back in the subway on his way to the office, where another blonde woman tries to make eye contact with him. She gets up and reveals her wedding ring to Brandon. But this time he chooses to ignore her and remains on his path to recovery. That's all for today. Subscribe and like it if you want more videos like this.